Welcome everyone to the latest instalment in Moreton Bay Region Library's newest author talk series, Three Things. In this series of video casts, we ask some of our favourite authors to tell us about three items or objects which have a particular resonance for them. But before we begin, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians and the traditional country on which our interview is taking place, and the elders both past and present. In my case, I'm on Turrbal ground here in Brisbane. I also recognise those whose ongoing effort to protect and promote Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures will leave a lasting legacy for future elders and leaders. Now today, I'm lucky enough to be talking to this year's Vogel winner, Kate Kruimink. Welcome, Kate.
Thanks so much, Karen. Thanks for having me.
For those of you who are unfamiliar with the award, the Australian newspaper Vogel's Literary Award is one of Australia's most prestigious literary prizes for an unpublished manuscript from an author under the age of 35. And as such, it's launched the career of over 100 Australian authors, including Tim Winton, Rohan Wilson, Kate Grenville, Andrew McGahan and Gillian Mears, and it's provided an important contribution to Australia's cultural landscape. Now, Kate Kruimink's manuscript for A Treacherous Country was unanimously voted as this year's winner, and that book has just been published by the sponsoring publisher, Allen & Unwin. Congratulations, Kate.
Thank you so much, Karen. It's so exciting.
Now, a little bit about Kate. Kate was born in Tasmania and spent most of her childhood in the Huon Valley, apart from an interlude on the west coast. After completing a largely ornamental arts degree, her wording, not mine, at the University of Tasmania, she lived and worked interstate and overseas for several years. Today, she lives once again in the Huon Valley, now with her husband and daughter. A Treacherous Country is her first novel. Welcome again, Kate. Thank you for joining us. Before we start talking about your three things, I wanted to check in with you as to how lockdown's been treating you. What have you been missing, and have there been any silver linings for you?
Thanks, Karen. Yeah, it's an interesting time for so many of us, and I mean, my overwhelming feeling is just of gratitude. You know, that I have health, my family and friends are all healthy, and you know, we've got somewhere to live, we've got some stability, so I'm very grateful. There are definitely things I miss. I find I don't have much free time now. So I work part-time as an English language teacher, and I used to drive into the city, which is about an hour away, and I would, you know, I'd have a bit of free time around my work, and I'd, you know, have to dress professionally and put a professional face forward, and none of that happens now. So I miss having time to myself. The silver linings, I think, are more time with my daughter, of course, but also I think it's sort of showing that a slower pace of life is possible. And I think also, hopefully, it might open up more possibilities for people post-lockdown, when we start to go back to normality, as we are now, I guess, that, you know, those of us who have been fortunate enough to be able to work from home, have kind of shown that it's possible, you know, even in workplaces where that wasn't part of the culture before. And so I think that that's going to make work a lot more accessible to a lot more people. Because that's my context, I'm particularly thinking of women with children. In my experience, there's always been something I can't go to, you know, even in the most accommodating of workplaces, there's always a meeting I have to skip or something. And so I think if some of those things could go online, more as a matter of course, then it's going to be a benefit for a lot of people.
That's fantastic. Thanks for sharing that, Kate. Now, I wondered if you could tell us a bit about your novel. I've just finished reading it, by the way, and I really did enjoy it. And I can see why the judges loved it. It's got a very particular flavour and texture to it. So if you could tell us a little bit about your character and his adventures, I think everybody would enjoy that. Thank
you so much for your kind words, Karen. I'm really glad you enjoyed it. So my book is called Treacherous Country, and it's set in Van Diemen's Land in 1842 with flashbacks to Norfolk, to the family life of the main character. He's a young man. He's called Gabriel Fox, 25, and he arrives in Van Diemen's Land with a very specific goal, a very specific mission, but this strange sense of almost unreality or disassociation. Things sort of unfold for him and he's pulled along, but he's not really pursuing his goal. He finds himself more and more reflecting on what happened at home and sort of grows within himself during his adventures in Van Diemen's Land, which include doing some whaling. But he comes to realize that his true motivations are pointing him back home, and that he needs to face up to a situation back there where he has been quite weak and he needs to go home and do better.
So how did you come to actually write the book, Kate? Did you choose the story or did it choose you? It's a very unusual story to my mind.
That's a great question. It chose me, definitely. It chose me. So I've always written, all my life, and I've had a few small publications before this novel, short stories and so on. So when my daughter was a few months old, actually like now, then too, she was a very poor sleeper. And with that and hormones and so on, I was in a bit of a state. I was really exhausted and I found I was sort of losing myself a bit. So I Googled the Vogel Award. I knew about it already. And I thought, if I can work on something and enter it, then that could give my days some structure. It could give me something to think about. So I Googled it and I had about 8 months. And I started looking at an older manuscript that I'd started writing years before, and it was too difficult. It was kind of too personal and it just wasn't right for the headspace I was in at the time. So I found this little side character in there who was called Mr. Whiteley, who was coming to this whaling station to buy it, and he can see it's not going to be a very good deal. And I kind of pulled him out, and he changed as I started thinking about him and writing about him. He became younger, he became more confused, more vulnerable, and his story unfolded kind of as I went. So yeah, it really showed itself to me.
That is very fascinating. I would not have expected that he really did speak to you, but I should really take that on board, because so many people say to me when they've written something that the characters have come alive as they've been writing and they've developed their own lives, irregardless of what you were trying to achieve as an author in the first instance. So
yeah, exactly. And as you go, sort of the story develops its own logic. You can think about it beforehand, but I think it's in the writing that things develop a rightness or a resonance, or not, as the case may be.
Thanks for sharing that, Kate. It's really interesting insight into how the book came to be. I could talk for a lot longer about the book, because there's so many interesting things about the other characters in the book aside from Gabriel, and Gabriel is so very interesting. But we are here to talk about your 3 things. So I am going to ask you, Kate, if you would share with us the first of your 3 things. And I believe it was something that belonged to your mother.
That's right. Yes, it's a book. Here it is. It's called, I assume it's backwards on the screen, but it's called Jill and Judy by Caroline Brown. This was a very much loved childhood book of my mother's. I don't actually know where she got it from, but there are a few clues. So it was secondhand. This name here is Rebecca Horswell, which was not my mother's name. So if anyone knows Rebecca Horswell, I have her book. And there's an inscription here that's been crossed out, which is Xmas 1950. And my mum was actually born in 55, so the book predates her slightly. So I think maybe my grandmother gave it to her, and I actually dedicated my book to my mum and my grandmother, because they were both really literary and both incredibly supportive as well. As a family member said, they would both have been doing triple somersaults if they'd been around to hear about my award. So they were very much with me for that. So there are actually better books that I could have chosen to kind of show a readerly family, you know, in a literary childhood. There were really good books that we enjoyed together, like The Secret Garden or The Hobbit or The Chronicles of Narnia. And this one is very simple. It's a book of stories. Everyone looks the same. Everyone looks like this. And everyone is very jolly and everything is fine in the end. You know, the conflicts are very, very gentle and very easily resolved. But the reason I chose this book in particular is that it's actually given me a bit of an insight into my mother, coming to it now with some maturity. My mum actually died 3 years ago. And this book kind of presents this sort of story, you know, obviously it's literally this storybook reality where everything is quite perfect. And I think that Mum felt like this is what she should have been. And she wasn't, of course, because no one is. I mean, this looks actually incredibly boring. It looks like nothing real ever happens in it. But I think she felt it as a bit of a failing that she wasn't this, which, I mean, obviously I have a lot of empathy for my mother, but this is sort of a renewed empathy that I have for some of the ideas that she had to struggle against in her life. So I've been grateful to find this again for that reason.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Kate. As you were talking, I was thinking there were some resonances there with Gabrielle's mother in your novel, where Gabrielle's mother is caught up very much in a society that has norms that she has to conform to that really impact on her mental health. And yeah, I don't want to say any more because we probably give too much away of what happens in the book as things are revealed to Gabrielle as he muses about them. So I'm going to ask you about your second choice, which I found quite intriguing because I'm from a very small place as well, from a small place in southwestern Victoria, and the object that you're going to talk about was quite an important one for me as well. So over to you, Kate.
Yeah, solidarity in that, Karen. I think being from a small place, it sounds like you've probably had this experience too. For a lot of people, it's quite important, if you can, to leave. And Tasmania is certainly like that. Tasmania is a wonderful place and I'm really happy to live here again, but it was important for my own growth to get out. So that's why this is my second object. It's my passport. So I got this one when I was about 24, so it's going to expire soon. I used one before this as well. You know, I went on a gap year. I had a bit of a troubled teenagehood, and a gap year was kind of my way of asserting independence, I think, and challenging myself and showing that I could be independent. And actually your observation that there are connections there with my mother and with the book are very true. As I wrote the book more and more, I came to realize that there was a lot of myself in there, which I don't know speaks terribly well of me, but that's the truth. But this passport is the important one. So when I graduated university, I did an English language teaching qualification. And again, I left. I went to Spain first for a couple of months to live with a family and, you know, share language. And while I was there, I got a job in Jakarta. So I had to wait for my visa to be sorted. So I spent a lot of time traveling around Europe waiting for this. And I went to Rome on a bit of a whim. I didn't really have enough money, but I just passionately wanted to go. I was in the Netherlands, which is, you know, reasonably far, seeing some family there. And so I just hopped on a plane and I went to Rome. And in the hostel there, I met someone. I met this young English guy called Matthew, and we spent a lovely day together in Rome, and we went to dinner together. I had to go to Barcelona next for a medical test related to my visa. And he said, you know, can I come? So, okay, you can come. And then in Barcelona, he said, you know, you're spending a lot of money traveling around Europe, waiting for your visa. Why don't you come back to England with me and wait there? And then in England, we thought, well, maybe you can come to Jakarta with me. So 6 years on, we're now married. We have little Edie. And the traveling was a really formative part. Well, it was almost the whole part of our relationship for a long time. We lived in Jakarta, we lived in Sydney, Auckland for a couple of years, and Melbourne. And it was from Melbourne that we came back to Tassie. I'm lucky that he likes it here, actually. I'm lucky he doesn't mind the quiet or the cold.
Yes, that it would be, but maybe for an English person, it's not too bad. So
that's true. I think it's less cold here than where he grew up, actually.
Yeah. So now we move on to Object 3. Thank you very much for sharing the story of your overseas experience and what that meant to you. And your third object, which I think is something more about your life now back in Tasmania. So if you would share with us your third object, please, Kate.
Yeah, that's right. So we came back to Tasmania in the end of 2017, I think, because I had discovered that I was pregnant. I mentioned we were living in Melbourne. It was actually only a couple of months after my mum had died, so it was a really, really emotional time for me, as you can imagine, with the pregnancy and grief too. So it was an easy choice to come back to Tasmania. I don't know if I'd ever really left. I would bring Matthew back every Christmas. I'd come for mental health visits sometimes, especially when we were in Auckland. So it always felt like home, and I always knew I'd come back. So this is my third object here. I don't know if you can see that. That's it's my daughter's patient ID. It says Kruimink, baby of Catherine, because she was unnamed for a couple of days. I tried to put this around her little wrist. She's 2 now, and it wouldn't go. This is very small. I don't know if you can see. So the birth experience itself was a bit of a shock to me. I was very, very confused afterwards, and they put this little doll in my arms, and I didn't know what was happening really. I think I sort of knew it was my baby, but I didn't really connect on an intellectual level. But the surprising thing for me sort of happened afterwards. So I was very aware of postnatal depression, and I knew that I would have to address it if I saw signs of it in myself, that it would be important to be on top of it and to be honest about it. But what happened was actually the opposite with me. So I mentioned when talking about my passport that I'd had a bit of a troubled teenagehood. I actually dropped out of school. I had to have special permission to be able to go to uni for that reason. But it was almost like my daughter reached out a little newborn hand and slapped me in the face and said, "Get a grip, woman, I need you." I've sort of been fine ever since. And I don't want to seem like I'm saying that, motherhood is the savior of all women or anything, because I don't believe that at all. It's not for everyone, and those people it is for, it can be so difficult. And of course it does have its challenges for me too. But in a way, Edie has been a bit of a savior to me. So that is why I chose this as my third object. I feel like it was another stage in my own development and my own maturity, was having her.
Well, thanks so much, Kate. It's wonderful to hear that Edie's made such a wonderful addition to your life. Unfortunately, I'm not a parent myself, but I do have many, many nieces and nephews, and I know that there's a tremendous joy in being a parent. So thank you for sharing with us, Kate. It's been a wonderful chance to say hello and share with you about how much I enjoyed your book. And I thoroughly recommend people to read it. It's not a depressing book or anything like that. You might think, there's some challenging things that happen to Gabriel, but in the end, it's quite an uplifting little book, and his experiences are quite entertaining as well. So I would like just to, before we finish, say that you can borrow Kate's book from our library. Kate's book is called A Treacherous Country, and we have regular copies and e-copies available, and you can also buy it from any good bookstore. And to thank you, Kate, and the wonderful Laura at Allen and Unwin for sharing you with us. And goodbye, everyone, and thanks for listening.
Thanks so much, Karen, and Moreton Bay Libraries for having me. I've really, really appreciated this opportunity to think about my treasures and what they mean to me, and what I could choose when limited to just 3 to represent myself. So thank you for that opportunity, and also thank you to everybody who's listened.